You're listening to episode 88, Reigning Victorious After the Trauma of Abuse, with Minister Annie Bell. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate having you here, of course. And this week I'm going to be joined by Minister Annie Bell of Annie Bell Ministries and author of r.e.i.g.n, A Survivor's Guide to Thrive. But before we get into today's episode, I do just want to let you know that it is brought to you by audible.com. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. I signed up with them to get you a free audiobook download, along with a 30-day free trial. They have over 180,000 titles, including some that have been mentioned on this show in the past, that you can choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or whatever you use as an MP3 player. So if this is something that interests you and you want to check it out, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible, and you can go ahead and get your free audio download along with that 30-day free trial. So Minister Annie is going to share her story with us today, which involves having been sexually abused growing up, and this was by multiple abusers. And in addition to that, she's also going to tell us about how she almost died when she was 3 years old because she ended up contracting polio. So she went through some traumatic times growing up, and she's going to share with us what that was like for her. And I do want to issue a trigger warning, especially if you are a sexual abuse survivor, as parts of Minister Annie's story could be upsetting to you. So just keep that in mind. But ultimately, this episode is about hope and inspiration. And one of the things that Minister Annie is going to share with us is about how a TV episode helped her realize that what was happening to her was wrong, and how it allowed her to stand up to her abuser, which of course is not an easy thing to do. And she's going to tell us about the fear tactics that were used to keep her quiet up to this point. And she's going to talk about how she dealt with anger and control issues, and how not addressing them only ended up making things worse for her. And she's going to talk about when she started to not feel so much shame around what had happened to her anymore, and how she knew that there was more to life than being a victim of abuse. And we're going to talk about reaching new levels of healing and achieving what she likes to call the Thrive Zone in life, and living the story that you want to tell, and how Minister Annie was able to turn her misery into ministry, as she likes to describe it. And that being said, Minister Annie is, of course, a woman of faith, and that has been a big part of her healing journey. And I just want to say for the record that I myself am not a religious person, and that has not been a part of my healing journey, but I can respect whatever someone's beliefs are and whatever has helped them to heal. And so whatever your beliefs are, I know that there's going to be something in this episode that you're going to be able to take away for your situation. And so without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this one, and I'm going to bring Minister Annie on. Minister Annie, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I am truly honored to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. So it's interesting because you actually reached out to me to be a guest on the show, and I'm glad that you did because your story is one that I'm definitely glad to share with the listeners. And what I like about your message is that, similar to mine, you're trying to give people hope that it is possible to thrive after growing up with abuse and trauma. And you just released a book not too long ago entitled r.e.i.g.n, A Survivor's Guide to Thrive. And r.e.i.g.n is spelled r.e.i.g.n, and it's an acronym. And I'll have you tell us about that later on when we get to that part of your story. But what I like to do is start things off by having you share with us what you'd like us to know about what you experienced growing up and then we'll go from there. How does that sound to you?
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
The story of abuse is in itself not unique, obviously, because there are 1 million children who are abused every year. And so it is quite an epidemic. There's just a slight portion of my story that is unique, however. When I was 3 years old, I caught polio from the vaccine and almost died. I was in South Korea at the time, and I had to undergo many corrective surgeries and many years of physical therapy to regain some mobility. I don't have complete mobility. I have one fully functioning arm, but my left arm and both of my legs, I have to wear a brace on one, and the other one is not fully functional, although I have some mobility. I had to learn how to speak again, how to do the basic things of feeding myself, drinking, all those things I had to relearn. Because obviously at 3, you're pretty much, the kids are pretty much running around and talking and enjoying life. But for me, I had to start all over. My first sexual assault was when I was 5 years old by a family member in South Korea. And I remember still having bandages on my legs, both of my legs, due to a recent surgery, and having to endure this sexual assault at the same time. And so that's my first memory of assault. My second uh, assault happened when I was 6, and that went on until I was 14 by another family member. And this time I'm an Army brat, so we had moved to the United States, and Korean was my first language because I was born there. But we came to the United States, and so my English was, I may have known maybe 3 or 4 words. And so the abuse that went on from the age of 6 to 14 is one that was most traumatic to me, and created most, if not all, of my scars. During that time, I had other events, abuse by a bus driver who inappropriately would touch me, and because I needed help to get on the bus, and my mother, she felt like I had to go to public school to learn how to live in this world of people who were fully capable, as far as mobility wise. So she made sure that I went to public school, but needed help. So the bus driver would hold me by my buttocks and place me directly on his, around his groin area. And that when I spoke up, I knew for sure that was not supposed to happen. And I said something, and the bus driver ended up getting fired. But this other family member, I was so entrenched in his fear tactics that I was just completely polarized, or just paralyzed, and couldn't really. I was scared to share with anyone until later on. But it was a weekly occurrence when my parents had to go to work or whatever have you. My mother had to go to work. That was like a weekly event during the weekend. So during the weekend, while other kids were out playing on the monkey bars and having a good time with their friends, I had to stay in the house and try to sexually satisfy this grown man. So that's pretty much what had happened. At age 14, I watched an episode of Quincy, MD, and I might be dating myself at this point because that's a pretty old show, but
Yeah, I
you don't
quite recall it.
yeah, well, that show, he was an MD, and he was an autopsy doctor, and he had a teenager who had killed herself, and he was trying to figure out what happened, and come to find out she was pregnant, and she was later on the DNA test showed that it was by her father. That was the first time that something came on to let me know that, hey, this is wrong. I'm not
Mm.
supposed to have to do this with a grown man. It's illegal. And that's when I had the enough guts and enough um, indignation to finally say to my abuser, it's enough, or I'm going to call the police. And thank God for Quincy, that show, because otherwise I don't know how much longer it would have lasted. During those times, I considered suicide. I actually attempted suicide, and I was also contemplating homicide because I wanted to kill this man. I wanted to have him dead. And
Mm.
so that's how low I had gotten until I saw this show. So that's kind of what happened, I guess, as a nutshell, in my life through the trauma.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that with us. And it sounds like you definitely went through a lot of traumatic experiences growing up. So was it telling your abuser that, this is enough that got it to stop?
Actually, it did, and there was other little incidents where when they were around that they might look at me a little funny or pat my butt or something like that. But the overt um, things stopped because I believe I said it with so much conviction that I was going to tell the police that he knew, okay, I can't mess with her for too much longer.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great that it worked out that way for you. Because I think a lot of times, maybe that's not always the case. People might speak up or stand up to their abuser, and doesn't always go that way, or more often than not, they're just not able to stand up to their abuser either.
Yes, I know a lot had to do with my personality. Um, I'm pretty, what's the word? I don't want to say aggressive, but I do, believe that we need to stand up for ourselves and others who are unable. And I've had that, remember having those thoughts. When I saw something that was not just, I would always speak up. But the fear tactics that was utilized to keep me quiet, uh, and without the knowledge base, that's what allowed it to go on for so long. Because coming from another country and being threatened that if I exposed it, that my mother and my brother would have to be sent back to Korea, and I
Mm.
would be sent to an orphanage, and I would never see my family again. And so, that just, and not knowing the law, I just thought, okay, that's going to be my life. And he said that he would make sure that he would, harm my family first. And so, those were like I said, the fear tactics that were used. At first, he would say stuff like, "This is what little girls are supposed to do for men," and that if we don't do it, that there's reprisal. And so, like again, at 6 years old, barely speaking English well, I took this man's word to be true. Um,
Right,
so,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So now, what was it like for you to come over uh, to the United States at that point? Like, was that a difficult transition for you? And especially like given how you contracted polio, and then also by, being abused as well. Was it difficult for you to transition to a new country?
It The transition to a new country wasn't that hard, simply because, as far as learning how to speak, because at that age you're a sponge. And so I think my brother and I, they threw us in our respective grades. So at 6 I was thrown into first grade. At 7 my brother was thrown into second grade. And they just allowed us to be in the environment. And I think after about 6 to 8 months, we were able to string sentences together, kind of, explain what we're trying to do. I remember sometimes being misunderstood. Like, for instance, there was one day when everybody kept pinching me, and I came home crying because I couldn't understand why all the kids were pinching me and laughing. And my dad said, "Oh, today was St. Patrick's Day." And so so my dad rushed us.
You're like, what's that,
Right,
right?
exactly. And you're supposed to wear green and stuff like that. And so my dad rushed us out and got us clothes with green in it. And I wore it the next day. Now, my dad should have known that it was only for one day. But anyway, I wore it the next day. And then I was pinching people. And then they began telling the teacher on me. And I'm thinking, I don't understand. Why are they pinching me? But it's okay. But they're not wearing green. I'm pinching them, and I get in trouble. But those little things that I remember, was a bit of it took a lot to understand, the traditions of things that happen in the United States and stuff like that. But, of course, I look at it now and just giggle because I think it's hilarious. But it was an easier transition for me. Now, as my mother, it was harder for her, the looks that she would get, because I'm half Black. So I blended better. Still not as much, but I blended better than she. She stood out like a sore thumb because she, obviously all Korean. So she had more of a learning curve than we did. Actually, we probably learned English sooner and even to speak and write sooner than she did. So it wasn't bad for us transitioning. Now, as trying to transition and still, balance out what was happening to me emotionally and physically through the abuse, now that was very hard. Trying to keep my esteem up, trying to put the face on when I went to school as if nothing was wrong. I'm scared for the weekend because I knew what was waiting for me. That was just horrible. I mean, I don't remember just having a weekend unless just having a weekend where I looked forward to the weekend. I mean, I looked forward to school because that I was safe there, from the abuse. Now there was, the some of the bullying and the teasing that happened in school, but that wasn't as traumatic as what was going on after school. In the weekends.
All right. And then, so you said the abuse ended when you were 14.
Yes.
All right. So, so what kind of happened after that? Like, how were you affected by all of this?
Mm-hmm. A very good question. I thought once the abuse stopped that I would regain some normalcy, but really what happened after the abuse was the memories that would play over and over again in my head that began to infiltrate the core, of my being. And the survival responses is what started kicking in, and I was coping, but not as well as I thought. And like I said, that's when I actually was considering taking my life because I just couldn't cope with all of the memories that just kept replaying. And I remember going to see Prince, Purple Rain, and I didn't have a relationship with the Lord to be able to pull on anything else for strength. And his story was about his abuse that he went through and how he became this great superstar. So I thought, wow, if he can do it, then perhaps maybe I have that chance too. And that is what kept me going, finishing school, getting into college, but I still was hurting. The trauma I had not healed from. And so a lot of it, I tried to watch talk shows like Oprah, in my 20s, try to get self-help books, but they kind of touched on what was going on, but not really filling what I needed, the void that was, needed to be filled in order to truly thrive until I gave my life to Christ. And I was 30 years old at that point. I was spinning out of control, and but I was very successful in the corporate world as a executive in the hospitality industry. But my personal life was just spinning out of control. Um, I had I was threatening to kill people if they even looked at me funny. And one time, one person actually placed charges on me for threatening to kill them. And I knew at that point that something more had to happen. Right around that time is when I said I left. I gave my life to Christ, and that was my true healing journey initiator. And so that's kind of, how I, I was able to truly overcome the traumatic experiences of my past.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of anger there.
I did. I didn't like any authority. I opposed authority from my workplace. I mean, it would be nothing for me to cuss out my boss if he even looked like he was going to disrespect me. Anybody walking in the street, if they looked at me funny. Now, mind you, I wear a brace on my leg. I'm disabled. And so people are going to look at me. They're going to see that, hey, I'm not walking like everybody else, but I would just go off on people. And even in friendships, if my friend tried to exert any authority over me, I would just go off. I never let anybody drive. I always had to either meet them or they had to ride in my car. I became almost a control freak of my environment, the world around me. I had to control everything. And that's one of the survival responses that I had. I didn't trust men. It took one of the reasons why it took me so long to give my life to Christ was because God is represented as a male, and so I didn't want anything to do with him. I hated God for the longest time because I felt, hey, there cannot be a God. It's a high place and look down and see um, kids and innocent people being killed and abused. And so it took me a long time to come to the understanding that it wasn't, God allowing it to happen, but there's a spiritual principle behind all that, and that it was, more than what I could understand as a non-believer. And so it I had to come into to the life with Christ in order to completely understand the unholy spirits at work.
Hmm. Yeah, I can relate to having gone through a lot of anger myself, and it's such a terrible thing.
Yes,
It's because it's like that it's not right, and it doesn't make you feel good, but at the same time, like you can't help it either, right?
exactly. Exactly, because you're trying to cope with those feelings, and some people get depressed, some people get angry, and I was one that was angered, and I was enraged at one point. Like I said, when I actually I had committed felony, and I didn't know it because I had threatened to kill somebody while I was on the phone, and those are federal lines, and so. Um, they were able to, press charges, and that held a felony charge. Now it was all expunged, and because the person never showed up for court and all that other stuff. But I mean, my life could have turned epically, epically bad, worse,
Hmm.
because of my own rage that I was unable to handle. And so I thank God that my destiny um, is different, and that the outcome is different, because it's certainly I was right at the cusp of being a statistic or
Mm,
another statistic.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, it's a terrible thing because it can just take control of you. And it's so ironic because, I mean, as you're saying, like you're trying to take control of your environment and the situations that you're in. But but really we don't, when we have that anger, we don't have control,
Yes.
so
That's very profound. Exactly.
yeah, it's crazy. um so, and were you talking to anyone about what you had gone through at this time?
I only told um, I had told my mother when I was younger, um, and I had told my brother. Now, my brother I told when I was about 8, but I swore him to secrecy because I was so scared that this guy was going to make good on his threats. So my brother, he tried to help me by making sure he didn't leave me alone, but that wasn't always um, an effective tactic because he was still a child and he had to still follow the commands of this adult. And so, a couple times when he was told to go outside, he would say, "Oh no, I'm gonna stay here and play with Annie." And after the abuser caught wind of what he was doing, he forced him to get out the house so that he could have his way with me. Uh, then later on, when I told my mother, the same threats were given to her. And again, she did not speak English well and didn't know the laws of the land. And so she was a bit helpless as well. After the abuse, probably when I was maybe about 15 or 16, I began telling my best friend. Wouldn't tell her exactly all that happened, but just saying, I was abused, by a family member. And so I began telling my story in little bits and pieces and in arenas where I felt it was safe to tell and that they wouldn't tell anyone and I could swear them to secrecy. But because at that point, I still had the shame and the embarrassment of what I was made to do. So, I still didn't want to tell a lot of people what was going on with me or what had happened to me.
Mm-hmm. When did that start to shift for you? When did you start to not feel that shame or embarrassment anymore? Was it when you started to um, become a woman of faith, or?
No, I really think it happened right around when I was reaching out for self-help books and watching the Oprah Winfrey Show. Not to plug her show that much, but she had a lot. Obviously, herself, she was abused, and she had a lot of shows that talked about how to recover and people coming out with their stories. And so I felt more empowered to begin talking about it and found healing in talking about it in safe arenas, which I didn't know the scientific piece to that. But one of the things in my radio show we talk about is it's talk therapy. The moment that a survivor begins to talk about their abuse in a safe environment, and I have to keep stressing that, then
Yeah.
um, immediately there is a level of healing that begins. It's like immediate, and so that's why we do the talk therapy on our radio show because even when you hear it, you become more empowered, and then when you start to speak your own story, even more empowerment, and so I would say that was around when I was in my early 20s that I started reaching out for these books and watching certain shows to give me, I guess, the information that I needed. I still needed to get the understanding of what happened and how far reaching this is, and that I was not alone in this epidemic, that I wasn't the first one and the only one that this has happened to.
Yeah, and I love how you turn to those things because I think that it might not always seem like it at first, but it can make such a big difference sometimes, and especially if we happen to come across stories of others or something, and just to start seeing that there is hope for things to get better.
Yes.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe things started to shift for you gradually over time. Would that be accurate?
Yes, but I had to initiate that shift. You know,
Mm.
I could have stayed stuck, and I could have just continued to wallow in these negative feelings that I had, but um, I just couldn't. I couldn't. I knew there was better for me. I knew my life was not that this. I didn't come into this world just to breathe the air and be somebody's sexual, you know, toy. Um, I knew there was more to this life. And even though everything around me was looking so bleak and spoke contrary of that, that I felt, but I continued to seek out this life of thriving, this I saw people walking around in the malls and at the airports laughing and smiling. I knew that people, so many people, couldn't be this happy for no reason. It must be real, and so I really seeked for that in my life. I really tried to embrace it and find my purpose, and I didn't stop until. So it wasn't just something that just happened. And the reason I'm saying this is because anyone, first of all, if you were a victim and you are still alive, you're no longer a victim. You are a survivor, number one. Number two, you have the right to enjoy your life. I mean, not to make this a religious program, but because I am a woman of faith, I have to say that, Jesus came and died so that he can give us life and that more abundantly, not to just live. And so, but you have to be purposed in finding that out. You have to be purposed in finding out, what is my purpose here? Why am I on this earth? And then once you go about seeking out your purpose and fulfilling it, that is where you're going to find, again, another level of healing, and another level of joy and happiness.
Hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, it's so important, like you were saying, that you have to make that decision to start to heal, to start to, make changes and want more for yourself. Because otherwise, I think, yeah, you are just going to get stuck. And it's very easy to just kind of stay in that place. It's very safe to do
Mm-hmm.
that. It's scary to make those
Yes, it
changes,
is.
you
Yes,
know?
it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's the only way that, we're going to be able to, start achieving the things that we really want and deserve to achieve.
Yes. And, there are other brothers and sisters who are survivors who don't make it. Whether they have become addicted to drugs and passed, or whether they died at the hands of their abuser. Your life means something. The fact that you're still alive and on this earth, it means something. You're not just breathing, taking up space and breathing up the oxygen. There's a purpose for your life. And as hard as it might be, because sometimes, like you said, trying to break out of that is scary because it's a new realm. But the grass is greener. On the other side of your misery and of your sorrow. So go after that. Go after that with your passion, with life blood. I mean, go after it as if your life, um, you know, is depending on it, because it is. You could die and still be alive. You can be so dead inside, but still walking around. That's not the type of life for you. It there's meaning in your life, and the reason why you are still alive. So whoever is going to hear this interview, I just want to make sure that resonates in their spirit, to keep on reaching for life.
That's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. Are there other things you'd like to mention that have, helped you to get to where you are today?
Well, I actually talk about that in my book. I didn't know that some of the things that I was doing was actually helping me to reach another level of healing. But one of the things is getting in touch with your inner self. And I talk about that in that book. But when we were young, when you were young and before any of the trauma and the abusive events had happened, there were things that you dreamed about, things that you thought about doing with your life when you grew up. And touching bases with your inner child, because he or she is still there, is going to help you connect to who you are. Yes, you have grown up, but it's going to allow you to connect with why you were made. What was your function in this kingdom? And so that was one of the things that helped me. I always, as a child, wanted to go to Disney World, and that was not something that was possible for us. So in my 20s, late 20s, I was able to go to Disney, and that was the first time that I was truly able to connect with this inner child. I mean, she woke up when, one of the things that I love doing is traveling. And so to help me maintain my healing journey, maintain my level of healing, is I make sure that I enrich my own life with travel, things that I truly enjoy. I also talk about reclaiming your life. And I just want to go through the acronym real fast because I think this might be a good time. But
Yeah, sure.
the I in I.e.g.n is to identify yourself as a survivor. R stands for reclaiming your life, because that is what is stolen from us when we go through abuse. E is to excel at living. We have to learn how to live again. We have to learn how to know what brings us, tears of joy, and what brings us, what floats our boat. The I stands for illuminate the dark. So there's darkness all around us. This world is quite evil. There's some good, yes, but the world is quite evil. But we have to be purposed, and we have to be a light for someone that might be still trapped in that darkness. And the G stands for grow in Christ, and the N stands for nurture yourself and others. And that's one of the things that we have to do as survivors as well, is learn how to nurture ourselves so we can nurture our children and our family. Because again, as victims, that is taken away from us, to feel as if our lives did not matter, that our lives centered around this abuser and what they want. And so we forget that we have to take care of ourselves, so that we can be there and be present for our family. So that's what I.e.g.n stands for. And those are the components that I had to utilize and to place in my life in order to begin to thrive. So this book is a resource and a practical guide, but it's a testimony of how the Lord used these practical things in my life in order for me to achieve the thrive zone, I call it, of life.
Mm. Now, I know this came out in June, right?
Yes, June 6th. It actually hit the bestseller list on Amazon, bestseller for new releases on Amazon, and I was quite shocked about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
When did you start writing it? How long did it take you?
Well, I started writing in November of last year, and I got a little sick, um, and then I was doing my radio, kind of put it off. So I started again in April to finish it up. So I would say it took me about, if I just added the times, the hours, it probably took me like a week. But it was like
that's really quick.
Yeah, but the week was spread out, like 2
Mhm.
hours every couple of days. I'm sorry, like 8 hours every couple of days, and so when you add it all up, it probably took me about a week and a half, but it spanned maybe about 6 months.
Gotcha. Was it difficult for you to write it and kind of go back to these times when you went through these traumas?
I was interviewed for another show, and they asked me that same thing, and yes, It was, although I have healed, but to put myself back into the little girl's shoes and to feel the feelings, allow myself to feel the feelings so that I can write it and describe it on paper, that was hard. And I cried. I cried for her, the little girl that was going through it. I cried tears of joy, knowing that I survived it, And I mean, it really took a lot to pour my true self into that book. I could have easily wrote the book without descriptives, without descriptions about my feeling and what exactly that world looked like to me. But I think it would not have been as poignant and profound for the reader, um, to let the reader know that whatever they're going through, they too can reach a level of healing and have a life that is better than their past, if I didn't do that. So that part was hard, to revisit those times of my past, and allow myself to feel those feelings again.
Sounds like it was an emotional experience, but overall a good one, I take it.
Yes, yes. I was able to go to another level of healing by writing that book. So,
Mm,
yeah, it was wonderful, and I pray that it blesses one who reads it. In some point, I don't even say it's about. You don't even have to be a victim of child abuse to truly appreciate some of the practical steps, because we all on this earth, we all go through something. Um, I mean, the Bible says it, here on this earth, we're going to go through our trials and tribulations. So I believe that it could be practical guide for just about any trauma of the past.
hmm Great. And where can people get it if they're interested in checking it out?
Sure, it's available at Barnes and Noble, as well as on Amazon.com.
All
And
right.
we are
So I'll
also right now working on getting it in the Lifeway Christian store, as well as Heaven and Earth, depending on what part of the country you're in. Lifeway Christian or Heaven and Earth, they should be supplying that in the next couple days.
all right. I'll have, the links to it, at least the Amazon link I'll have on the show notes page.
Right.
So yeah, so tell us about, how you're doing today and other things that you're still struggling with.
Well, still working. I'm still working through some of my survival responses. One is I'm very protective of my children. Um, some would call it overprotective, but I'm working on finding a balance. And my husband, he's very good at helping me if he knows that I'm coming from the vein of my past trauma. He'll, hey, Annie, do you think that maybe we could talk about this, and what are your fears? And he'll help me to talk it out. Last year was the first time my children were ever allowed to go spend time with a cousin in another state. And they were gone for about a day and a half. I could have swore I was going to die, because I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on with them? But it was a big step for me. They came back, they were happy, they had a great time. And most kids, that's a summer experience to go and hang out with their cousins and stuff like that. But that was their first time ever doing it. My son was 5 and my daughter at that time was 9. And before that, taking them out for maybe 30 minutes was tops for me. And I had to follow you in my car. So, so that was a big deal. I'm also very sensitive to the hurts of others, and I have a deepened desire to aid in the healing journey of others. So that's another, I think, lasting effect for me, is that I want to continue to help people. Now that's more of on the positive side. Um,
hmm
you know, things that I'm doing now. I mean, I'm happy. I have joy in my life. You know, it's almost as if that trauma happen to someone completely different, because my life has turned out so different than what it was supposed to have turned out to be. And I go after and pursue my passions, that I believe the Lord has laid out for me. This book, the radio show. I also have my own nonprofit ministry where it's called Wealth Management Ministries, and I teach financial literacy as well as give Christian counseling and life coaching. And so I am living the story that I want to tell. I am, I don't want to sound like a cliche, but I am just very happy and joyful in the where I am in life. There's definitely more that I want to achieve before I leave this earth, but I'm happy with where I am and the trajectory of my future.
That's great. You mentioned there about how you feel like what happened to you was like another lifetime ago or something.
Yes.
And that's something that came up a couple episodes back as well. My guest was talking about that and how they feel like they've lived a few lifetimes now. And it's interesting how that happens, right? Because it's like when things just change so dramatically and, like you probably feel like you're living a life today that you didn't even think was possible back then, right?
That's right. That's right. I really was in such a dismal place right before I had taken those pills to try to end my life. I just felt like there's nothing in this life that I want. It's just filled with misery. It's just filled with hurt and pain, people killing each other, raping each other. I don't want any part of this. From that time to now, where God has allowed me to see so much of the good things as well and being a part of it. And one of my, things that I quote all the time is, God allowed me to turn my misery into ministry. So to be able to turn around and help other people, give them hope, give them, a guide to help them that is to me, like I said, my passion and my lifeblood. So to be able to operate in that, you would have, at that age when I was about to end my life, you would have never told me, could have been able to tell me anything different. But I'm thankful that those pills, for whatever reason, it did not work. I mean, I took 15 horse pills that should have really taken my life. But I woke up the next day. I was angry. I was like, I can't even kill myself, right? But I'm so glad that those pills did not work.
Yeah, there's so much hope in your story, and I think that's great, and thank you for sharing it with us. I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today, and that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Trust your intuition and don't be scared to tell someone to go get help. Even though I knew deep down in my knower that what he was doing to me was wrong, I didn't have any evidence and I didn't have any proof to convince myself otherwise. Plus, with all of the fear that he was placing in me as a 6-year-old, I believed his threats had merit. But if I knew that what he was doing, without a shadow of a doubt, if I knew that it was wrong, then I know I would have spoken up sooner. I know I would have reached for help from other places, entities sooner. That's what I would tell myself.
Yeah, easier said than done, but definitely good advice. But before I let you go, Minister Annie, tell us how people can connect with you and find out more about everything that you have going on.
Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a website, 2 of them actually, Annie Bell Ministries, plural.com. So AnnieBellMinistries.com or wealthmngt.org. And you can connect with me on Facebook. I have the r.e.i.g.n group, which is r.e.i.g.n, and also the Annie Bell Ministries Facebook / Annie Bell Ministries. I'm also on Instagram at Annie Bell Ministries, at Twitter on r.e.i.g.n Radio. And I'm going to give my phone number out, which is 678-708-7132. You can also purchase my book on Amazon, and I think she's going to put a link up, but you can also find it on Barnes & Noble as well.
Yeah, sounds great. I will have links to all of that on your show notes page. So just thank you for coming on here today. And like I said, for sharing your story with us, because I think there's so much hope there and it's just really inspiring. And I appreciate that. Hopefully it's been able to resonate with the listeners and they're able to take something away from it and feel hope for their situation as well. So thank you for that. And thank you for, reaching out to me.
Yes, you're welcome. And thank you for, responding and back to my inquiry. Thank you for this time to share with your audience. And I just appreciate you. I pray that there's something that was said during this program that will change a life for the better. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
You do the same.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 88. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Minister Annie to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. And one of the things that I know Minister Annie wanted to make sure you took away from this episode and from her message is that if you're still here, if you've survived, then there's a purpose for your life. And you should go find out what that is. And I absolutely agree with that. You being here means that it's not too late. It's not too late to become the person that you might have been, as the saying goes. And I hope that you can realize that and that you can take that message to heart. And come back next week to listen to survivor Monica Martin of monicamartin.org talk about how she's been able to overcome growing up with physical and emotional abuse, which left her feeling lost and confused, and how she's been able to find herself and find her tribe in this world. And I also just want to take a moment to mention that I've been hearing from some of my past guests about how you guys have been reaching out to them and how they've been able to support you. And I think that that's such a great thing. And I just want to remind any of you listening that if you resonate with any of my guests, feel free to reach out to them. That's why they give us ways in which you can do that. So just keep that in mind and know that we're all here for you. Whether you want to reach out to me or you want to reach out to any of my guests personally, we're always happy to hear from you and support you in any way that we can, because you are not alone in what you're going through, and we're all here to help each other. And just a reminder, if you want to check out that deal from Audible, where you can get the free audio download along with a 30-day free trial, that's at thegrassgetsgreener.com/Audible. And don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review if you haven't done so yet, so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.